All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me at another Ask Me Anything live stream event here with We the Govern. And I'm hoping that I can, I have some things I'm going to do differently today. So I'm going to try something new, and we'll see how well that works. And I'm just always interested in your feedback. So you can let me know if I do it right or if I don't. Now, there's a couple things that are obviously going to be kind of top of mind at this point in time for this live stream today, I imagine. And one of them will be the discussion about Columbia, which is my alma mater, and all the drama that's going on that campus right now. And another issue that probably might come up, because it just seems to continue to come up, is just kind of some orientation as these last couple weeks come down to filing week, which starts next week. What should you expect to see? What are you going to be watching for and tracking to see who files for office and what it means, and all these other issues and things that tend to come up around this time of year. One thing I also wanted to mention is that last week I did a video, and I think I launched it on Saturday, discussing that there had been a video, not really a debate, more like a panel discussion that Representative Walsh and I had in support of Initiative 2117, which is the one that repeals the carbon tax scam. And just this kind of big bloated $1.3 billion just extraction scheme, making you pay more for gas so that the state can kick your tax dollars into the pocketbooks of lots of billionaires and wealthy corporations in the state. And so on the other side was Representative Fitzgibbons, who's a Democrat representative in the legislature, a Seattle Democrat, and then also another lobbyist, Paulo, is a lobbyist there as well. And so, and she represents a lot of people who get some of this cash out of the carbon tax scam. And so there were a couple clips that I kind of just cut out of that interview, and that's what I'm going to be playing at some point in time when we get to it. And so even though I talked about doing a video about it, I think I'm just going to integrate this into the live stream tonight and just see if I can do it right. So I can kind of explain, I think, the narrative that the opponents of this initiative, the ones who support the tax, what their narrative is going to be as we get closer to November and trying to sell people in the community to pay a lot more for their fuel and to heat their home, so that Bill Gates' special investments in a lot of these companies pay off for him. So anyway, we're going to have some interesting topics, I think, to discuss on that front. The other thing I was going to mention, next Wednesday, so not this week, but Wednesday the 8th, if you're up in Bellingham, and it's going to be, I'm speaking at the Whatcom, there's a business club, Northwest Business Club up there, so I'll be speaking up there on the 8th. And I feel like there's something else I was going to mention, but anyway, that's something I'll just throw out there as another event. For those of you who were in Snohomish County last Thursday, it was fun to see everybody there at the Evergreen Women's Republican Club at Sean O'Donnell's up by Everett. It was a great time to see everybody up there and to visit. That was a pretty full program, so I'm sorry for those of you who kind of probably stayed a little bit longer than you wanted to, but I thought that was a good program. And just, again, as always, it's just good to be out there. Something else, too, so I don't forget, I'm also going to be in Spokane on the 4th at the Caper Banquet, Citizens Alliance for Property Rights Banquet in Spokane. I was there at the Tukwila State Banquet that they had a few weeks ago, and then I'll be at the banquet out in Spokane, which is going to be mostly focused on the Spokane chapter of Citizens Alliance for Property Rights. And so there's going to be a lot of great people out there. I believe I'm doing about a 30-minute workshop, just teaching activism to the people who will be there. If you haven't signed up for that program already, I believe that it's online, capr.us. You should be able to go directly get linked into the Caper Banquet and speaking program out there. So I'll be out in the Spokane area then. And it's possible tonight, I just don't know how the time frame is going to work out after I'm done with this live stream, but if I have time, one of the venues tonight down here in Vancouver, which is where I'm filming, they're going to have a forum tonight, I believe, on the initiatives. And I'll probably miss most of it, but I think this live stream ends, and I'm really close to where that venue is. So I might try to run by there and just maybe catch the last 10 minutes of that or something before I get out of here. So anyway, I think that's a couple things that are going on. Again, as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you like what this program offers to you, or if you feel like I'm doing a reasonably decent job, or if you just want to mock me with your friends, feel free to share this video link or my YouTube channel link down below to anybody else. I am going to be adding a couple of links to the live stream video here in the video description down below. Just as some content backup to this conversation. So I may reference some issues that we discussed today, and then I'll just try to remember to go back into it this evening and put some live links into the description, the video description down below. Let me get into a couple of these questions that people have already posted here first before I jump over to the video program. This will be my kind of experiment in a few minutes here on that whole thing, but I figured I'd jump in. You had a couple people post some questions up here, and let's just start with this one. Cristiano, will the ban on natural gas be challenged? I believe at this point in time that it probably will be. It's a little bit more complex than it may sound initially, just because the way the legislation ended up kind of coming through the torture process in the legislature. It doesn't instantly ban natural gas. What it does is it sets the stage so that natural gas can be phased out and banned. So it doesn't instantly do it, right? It's more like this lag time delay. And it's kind of a sneaky way of doing it. They're actually doing it in the most expensive way for you as a consumer that the legislature could cook up. And one of the ways of doing that was to modify how, like Puget Sound Energy, for example, writes off some of their investments in natural gas, and it's a tax change that a paperwork change to some extent as far as how they're allowed to report some of their expenses, and it essentially makes their business model much more costly, and then it explicitly allows them to be able to raise the rates on all consumers of Puget Sound Energy, whether it's gas or electricity in the state. Anybody that is a consumer of Puget Sound Energy, it simply makes it a lot more expensive to be that consumer, and it gives kind of just an open door to the monopoly of this particular entity and their ability to jack up the prices a lot higher on you. So the legislature is certainly, led by the Democrats, has just been primarily focused on increasing the cost of living for you and everybody else in the state. So that seems to be one of their highest priorities, and that's how they've approached the natural gas, ultimately the ban, but it's not initially a ban. So repealing it's a little bit, there's been a couple of different theoretical approaches and a number of different versions of initiatives that have been put into the hopper to potentially be on the ballot this November, but there's timelines associated with how long it takes to collect those signatures, which version is going to come out of the ballot title challenge process in the legislature or in the court system in Thurston County, and I don't have a total answer to that yet. So once I see where they're at, and once I see that they're actually out there collecting signatures, I'll be the first to tell you, or at least within a few days on this channel, I'll let you know. But right now I'm not seeing them ready to do that yet. So let's see. Jason, you got another question here. What are your thoughts on scam? Yeah, Sound Transit 2 line opening. Apparently they're billions of dollars in the hole and behind schedule. Well, that has kind of been the name of the game for Sound Transit. They're always billions of dollars in the hole. They're never on schedule. They're never on time, and they're never even remotely close to whatever their projected costs are. In fact, if you want to know a guaranteed lie, look at what Sound Transit says they're going to do over the next few years, because none of it's going to be true. It's always a lie. They've existed on lies. That whole organization is just one big pile of lies designed mostly to extract money from you and I and everybody else and put it into incredibly unproductive and ineffective transportation projects using 18th century technology in a modern world, and not even making any attempt to pretend like it's going to achieve anything effectively. I mean, one of the problems of course, with the light rail system and the way that it's been implemented in Washington State, is essentially fare collection is almost irrelevant. Like, they almost get no money back from the fare collection. They get a little bit. Part of it's that they don't really enforce it. Part of it's that the only way they can get riders is if they make it as close to free as possible, which then simply turns it into basically traveling fentanyl and meth addicts, kind of a free way to get high while you're riding on the Sound Transit train. And that's your best way to see Puget Sound, is if the trains aren't running. No guarantees, but if it actually is, it's going to be filled with fentanyl addicts enjoying the view and not paying anything to be there, or meth addicts, same thing. And of course, with some recent changes in the state law, you're not allowed to defend yourself from the violent criminals that they're trying to fill these trains with. And so it's not exactly making it a more attractive public transportation option in Washington State. And of course, there are always billions of dollars in the hole. Essentially, Sound Transit, the way to understand their financing, it's basically a shell game. Whatever, as their current rollout of whatever version of Sound Transit that they're currently on right now, as they run out of funding or the ability to borrow as much as possible to put future generations in debt for their failures of today, what they do then is they realize they're coming to the end. It's a complete disaster, and they're short, $5 billion or $10 billion, whatever the number is at this point in time. Then what they do is they find some way to lobby and collect more cash from future generations, and claiming that they're going to do new things with that, when in reality what they're mostly doing is using the new money to pay back the costs that they had promised that they would spend last time. They really benefit from the fact that media pretty much gives them a pass. Every time they're talking about these projects, they throw a lot of cash around, they buy off a lot of businesses and a lot of insiders, and that's just kind of how the grift just keeps growing. But it's one of the most bloated operations of the big public operations in Washington State, and at least on a big construction project standpoint. And obviously, the state would be far better off just to shut it down and stop the bleeding before it goes too far. But if you happen to drive on I-5 and you see the new, as they're building some of these elevated lanes, for light rail in to get up to Federal Way, it's just a massive undertaking for a project that they're building. And, I like public works projects if there's actually going to be some payoff at the end of the day. If you've driven over I-90, I think that the expansion of the I-90 highway, especially over the pass, was long needed, long ago. And even if it's 20 years too late, at least they're getting something done, and we're getting something for our tax dollars. No guarantee it's being spent well. I hope the engineering is done honestly and accurately. It looks pretty good to me from what I've seen, and what I know driving over the passes. That's an example of a public works project that, even if they're incompetent and over budget, at least you get something out of it at the end of the day. My concern, of course, with Sound Transit is that we get very little value, in fact, pretty much no value at all, for a massive amount of malinvestment of money that if we'd put it into pretty much anything else in Washington State, like fixing old bridges, expanding highways, reducing congestion in 405 or the 167 corridor, or any of these other places, it would have been way better use of funds. But of course, that's not how they roll at the Department of Transportation, particularly, though, with Sound Transit, which is one of the worst run programs in the state. And they absorb just an inordinate amount of your taxpayer dollars and provide a heck of a lot less value in return. Let's see. Andrea, you got a question here about you saw that more illegals in Washington are able to get Medicaid thanks to the legislature and a federal waiver of immigration status, of course, for this. Thoughts? I find it infuriating. Well, again, it's the same kind of issue. If you want more illegal behavior, what you need to do is subsidize it, and that's one thing our country has done really well. That's not just a unique Washingtonian issue. That's actually across the board, with the exception of a few states that have decided to crack down on illegal immigration, and therefore the cost burden that's being impacted on the schools and the medical system and law enforcement and transportation and just everything else. Outside of those states that have started to wake up and start to do something, sanctuary states like Washington that have encouraged and seem to be incentivizing more of this, they're simply making it obviously a lot easier to be a criminal in Washington, and that's just kind of been one of the things that they do. So, all right, let me set the stage for this next part of this process, and hopefully I do this right. This is a little technical change that I've had here at the program, and I wanted to try it out, and hopefully I do this right and it works. So a couple weeks ago, as I had mentioned in a previous video, Representative Walsh and I went down on what's called the Seattle Channel, kind of City Inside Out. It's a program that they have. It's actually in Seattle City Hall. It's a little studio that they have downstairs. I've been on the program once in studio before. It was years ago on Initiative 1639, where I was opposed to that initiative. And I was on a panel discussion at that point in time. And so this is essentially the same show a few years forward, which is now, and they wanted to do a program on Initiative 2117, which was the repeal of the carbon tax scam. And so Representative Walsh and I came there to speak in favor of the initiative, and Representative Fitzgibbons, who's a Democrat from Seattle, came there to speak in opposition to it. And then Paula, who's a lobbyist in Olympia and represents a lot of the people who plan to profit from or currently profit from the cash they extract from you paying higher gas tax, was there as well. And there's a couple clips of what they're saying. I'm not going to play any of the clips of Representative Walsh or I defending Initiative 2117 and why people like it. We can talk about that afterwards, but I really want to break down the language that apparently is going to be used by those who oppose the initiative, who want you to keep paying maximum dollar on your gas tax and on your heating costs for your home and everything else. And remember, what Initiative 2117 does is it repeals the Inslee's Climate Commitment Act scam that he got the legislature to pass a couple years ago. And in fact, voters have already shot this down twice, and then Inslee decided to shove it through. It's presumed that his future employment prospects when he leaves the governor's office is in some way impacted by this program. So he's hoping to jump into a job apparently related to some entity that's going to be getting money from this program. And so that seems to be what's going on out there. He's not denying that, so my guess that seems to be one of the more likely situations. Regardless, there's been a complete panic meltdown of the Democrats, a lot of these grifting operations in Olympia. And so I want you to hear the way, though, they're describing their opposition to this. And I think the first clip I'm going to play here, about a minute, is just a quick clip from that panel discussion that we were on. And so the moderator, if you're looking at this video, the moderator's on the left. There's four of us sitting there. Jim Walsh and I are kind of on the outside of this at this table, and you'll get a chance to actually see what the opposition says. And I just want to play it for you, and then I'll kind of translate it after we're done.
Sure. So Initiative 2117 would allow unlimited pollution in Washington state. It eliminates the cap on Washington's pollution that is starting to work to protect Washingtonians' health. It allows the pollution that harms our lungs, that harms our climate, that harms our landscapes, that harms salmon. And at the same time as eliminating all of those caps on pollution and allowing unlimited pollution, it does away with funding for things like food security for the hungriest people in our state, for wildfire suppression and prevention, for salmon recovery, for investments in traffic safety, and for the equipment that we need to actually monitor our air quality and ensure that we're making progress towards improving the health of people in our state. So at the same time as we allow unlimited pollution, we do away with a lot of things that are really important to the people of our state and protecting their health.
All right, so that's Representative Fitzgibbons, and I think that he effectively and is basically portraying the angle and the argument that they're going to be using to convince you to vote no on Initiative 2117 to keep these taxes imposed on you. What was interesting to me, though, is that it's just kind of this word salad thing of thrown out there of all these wonderful, the children, the air quality, everything's going to go to heck if you vote yes on Initiative 2117. And this is one of the games that government oftentimes plays with budgets. This is they do this at the local level, they do this at the state level, they do this at the federal level. So in theory, you have the government that exists and has always had programs in place for about 100 years now, give or take, for things like traffic safety, like food safety, health programs, wildfire mitigation, for example. He mentioned a couple of these different things down there. Now, they've always had budgets and programs that were related to this. Anybody that remembers the CCC back in the 1930s, and even before then, some of the Forest Service efforts in Washington State to manage forest fires, and some of the programs that they had implemented, even starting about 100 years ago, about reforesting or cleaning up logging operations, things like this. So these programs have been out there forever. So then what the state does is they, through ineptitude, incompetence, and corruption, basically gets rid of some of these programs that are actually useful. They actually produce some value to the taxpayer and to the people who live in the state. And what they do is they downgrade, they steal money from those programs, they make them so they're a little less effective, and then they pass a new egregious tax like this Climate Commitment Act tax. So this carbon tax scam. And now they got this windfall of all this cash. So they'll divert a percentage of that cash, just some small amounts here and there. And they dribble it out to a bunch of their lobbyists, supporters, people who write campaign checks to them. And they say, listen, take this money and it'll help you with just filling in the blanks, right? It'll save the kids. Air quality monitors, which is funny because the state has air quality monitors all over right now, and they have had for decades. And they're monitored by the Clean Air boards mostly. It used to be a Department of Ecology, but now it's Clean Air Board. So he's suddenly saying all those will go away, even though they've been there for decades before this program, this tax was ever imposed. Suddenly now all this stuff's going to go away because you decided that you didn't want to have the scam tax and pay a lot more money with your fuel and your heating costs at home. This is kind of the supplanting of the budget that goes on. It's just really this game behind the scenes where there are programs that the government will run that people generally accept. Okay, we've decided the state's going to run. We have a Department of Transportation. You're going to run traffic programs and planning for freeways or major bridges over waterways, or the wildfire safety program or health and safety programs, basic stuff that have been in place for over 100 years now. And so that's been in the budget forever. Now, I'm not saying they do a good job with it. Most of the time they're incompetent. I'm not saying they don't waste a lot of money in these programs, because clearly they do. And I'm not saying that they aren't corrupt in that sense that even the existing programs divert a lot of cash away from the actual project and into the pockets of insiders. All that goes on. But generally, people have accepted, okay, this is an area where government works right now, and there's maybe some value that's gotten out of that. Now, it's true that you might be able to do the same thing for $100, and the government spends $10,000, but at least it's something that's not actively destructive and harmful to us, and that, in theory, we've assigned the government to do it as ineptly as they do. Well, then what happens is now their excuse, right, is all these things that we've supposedly been doing for 100 years, we suddenly can't do any of them anymore if you take away this new $1.3 billion annual windfall, despite the fact that our state has had $18 billion of surplus funds that have come in and been squandered by the legislature in their budget-making process for the last, 7 years, I think? It might be 8 years now where they've had $18 billion just a surplus. That's beyond the budget that they've had. And do they set aside any money into the rainy day fund? Yeah, a little bit, but not much. Do they prepare for rainy? Do they ever give you a tax cut? No, they don't. It's always about more and more and more, because the greed of government is insatiable. And I think Representative Fitzgibbons did a good job representing that greed in his defense of the Climate Commitment Act here. So that when you hear this stuff, as they come out and say that the end of the world is going to happen, unlimited pollution, air quality is suddenly going to go down, they'll ignore the fact, of course, that they've had one of the most incompetent forest management plans in place for certainly since Goldmark's been in there, but even before then with some of the state plans they've had to make the forests as unsafe and as fire-ready as possible, right? So they'll burn up as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible. Hillary Franz kept the pro-burning program going as much as possible. She was there. No matter how many millions of acres they burn, though, it's never enough for the environmentalists, and so they always try to push for more policies that are going to ensure that the rest of the forest, whatever's left, burns as well. And instead of going back and fixing it with thinning programs or brush management or anything that just would be common sense, instead what they do is they keep piling on these bad policies. Now that's how you get bad air quality, as we saw last year. Now a lot of the air quality, of course, came from fires up in British Columbia and other places where, believe it or not, we actually can't change the rest of the world with a little project in Washington. So, but we can't control what burns here, and the incompetent forest management practices have ensured that as much as possible we've been able to burn a large percentage of our forests all the time. So what they'll argue now is suddenly the next forest fire, they're going to blame it on this because you took away this tax, right? If you just tax ourselves enough, we're going to suddenly get more. But of course, that's not true. And but I'm sure a lot of the very wealthy donors to these political campaigns and the people who plan to extract some of that cash for their businesses, the Solyndras of today, right? The failed scam solar panel company that was funded during the Obama administration that was just a scam, and they got hundreds of millions of dollars and then instantly vaporized because they were incompetent. There's plenty of those around, plenty of people running businesses like that today, and they want this cash too. So they're going to jump on full throttle, enthusiastic about it because it gives them some cash. Now let's go to the next clip. In this case, it's Paula talking, and she's a lobbyist, so I think she's doing a good job here. Very friendly person. You got to be a good, friendly, personable person in Olympia as a lobbyist, and I want you to listen to what she has to say.
But Representative Welsh, I would say this. I think when we start talking in these esoteric platitudes, what we do is we confuse people, we confuse voters.
You're not confused, Paula. They want to overturn this cap.
They are, because what we don't do and what we have done with the WBBA is we've gone to people and we've sat down at their kitchen tables and we have explained this in a way that makes sense. What we've said to them is, think about it when he says, you know, we're doing linkage and it's a scheme. It's not a scheme. You know, middle-class person, how do you get your packages? You order them through Amazon, right? They come through these little vans. Well, that's an MHD. Part of what cap and trade has done is these medium to heavy-duty vehicles, we are replacing those with electric vehicles. The #1 emitters of GHG gases are these vehicles that are traveling up and down your roadways every single day. Yeah. Do you know who lives among I-5 in these corridors? They are your poorest people and they're your middle-class people. Yeah. They live in Kent, they live in Seattle, they live in Tacoma, they live in the CID. And so if you want to reduce pollution, you have to take these MHDs off of the roads. You have to reduce the number of fossil fuel vehicles that are traveling. That's what companies like Amazon are doing. They're reducing those vehicles. They're reducing the size and they're electrifying their fleets. These dollars are being invested in the TES, the Transportation and Electrification Strategy, to reduce those number of vehicles so that Washington, like California, by 2030 and 2050 can electrify the state. It is not a scheme. We're saying we believe your life is worth saving. That is going to overall reduce your cost. And that's what, when we start talking in these lofty terms so that people don't understand it, we think we're giving them a binary choice, and then we're taking those dollars and we're reinvesting those in those working class communities with those people.
Please. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll find out.
Okay, well, sorry about that. I kind of screwed up a little bit that video, but so that's, Paula, I think, accurately representing the angle that the lobbyists and the special interests are going to basically be using to also come out of the woodwork and try to oppose 2117. What I like is, and to be fair, again, a friendly person who's basically there explaining, and she didn't like the fact that we were talking about what Initiative 2117. Really, it's not hard to understand. Vote yes, pay less. Do you want to pay less on your fuel and your cost of heating your house? You vote yes. If you want to pay a lot more, then come up with some other scam and excuse for why you're going to pass a carbon tax linkage scheme and reward all these multi-billionaire and these companies, and then you can pay more. And somehow that's going to make you pay less. It won't. There's no scenario where this makes you pay less. Every scenario that can possibly be gamed out on this is that if this Climate Commitment Act scam is allowed to exist, you're going to pay a lot more. But I love how they bring in, like, and then what I liked was in the part of this, and I'll link to this video down below when I'm done. I won't be able to get that done until after I'm done with the video tonight, but I'll link to the actual original presentation there. they didn't, they're talking about, oh, look we got this big oil company, BP, is coming out of the woodwork and they support this tax. Of course they do. It's a kickback scheme. They make a ton of money on it. It's a beautiful way. You buy off enough people, they'll all support it. Amazon supports it, sure, because you're going to make it so that those useless electric trucks that are failing in California, that don't work, you're going to be able to let Amazon spend hundreds of millions of dollars on them. You're going to give them the money. Amazon, a company that could afford to do it themselves without it, but now you get to make it so that they can do that for free, and they can pretend to be green too, just like everyone else. And just these other just ridiculous scams that are going on. The groups that are coming out of the woodwork to oppose Initiative 2117 are the ones who plan on extracting that cash for themselves. All of them. That's why they're there. That's why you're going to see them opposing it. That's why Bill Gates has stuck $1 million into opposing this, because he's got personal investments in several of these companies, and it's going to reward him personally. You have, I was just looking at some of the donors to the opposition campaign. Chris Stolte, another billionaire, right? Sarah Murner, Craig McKibben, the Far Star Action Fund, which that one I know a little bit less about, but I'm going to dig into it now. They write $1 million checks, $500,000 checks to oppose Initiative 2117 so that you get to pay a lot more for your gas so that you can help the billionaires reap the financial rewards from the companies that they've invested in, that the state's going to use your tax dollars to subsidize. It's just one big scam. It's an open and obvious scam. They're not even really trying to hide it. They just know that that's not how they can campaign on it. So they're going to try to pretend like somehow if you just pay more, you're going to have, you'll save the children, the butterflies will come back, bluebird, butterfly, sunshine, all that kind of stuff. That's the argument here. Now I'm going to have this last clip and see if I can go back and fix this. And this will be Fitzgibbons again at the end, I think, making one of his final statements here.
This November, we have dairy farmers in Sunnyside who oppose the initiative because we're seeing investments from the CCA in sustainable dairy farming practices. We have firefighters in Morton and Lewis County opposing the initiative because of how the initiative would defund our forest health investments and our wildfire response. We have the Squamish tribe opposing the initiative because of how the initiative would defund our salmon recovery efforts. We have $25 million that we allocated for nuclear energy. We're not just talking about biofuels and wind and solar. We're also talking about nuclear energy, clean technologies that Washington has really led the world on and can lead the world on in the future, that we invested in this year's budget to grow the technology related to small modular reactors. So, but what we know for sure is that if we pass the initiative, then we allow unlimited pollution in the state and we defund all of those programs. Sure. So Initiative 2117 would allow unlimited pollution in Washington.
So again, I want to go back and just explain this now. Well, this is what he said. And I think Representative Fitzgibbons did a good job representing what the opposition to 2117 really want you to believe somehow, is that this tax went into effect last year, right? So suddenly they want you to believe that up until then, Representative Fitzgibbon was out there and letting everybody pollute as much as they wanted to. And suddenly now this tax is imposed, and now they've got some control over it. It doesn't. All the tax is just an indulgence for polluters to say, so polluters with carbon dioxide, the same thing, the same pollution that comes out of Representative Fitzgibbon's mouth every time he breathes. So they're basically saying anybody that does this, that you can pay us an indulgence, like they did in the medieval ages for sins in the Church of Europe. You can pay an indulgence, and then we'll let you keep polluting as much as you want. And so you just get to pay for it, and then we give you a free pass. That's essentially how it works. And the government loves this pay because it comes into the slush fund in the state, and then they can dole it out to all their friends. And it's just one massive, massive scheme to just cash in. And so every lobbyist under the sun, every government program they'll stretch and exaggerate and lie to get their hands on that cash. And it's awesome if you're involved in writing the bills to kick this cash out to all your friends and campaign contributors. And so it's not just Bill Gates and some of these other guys that are writing the $1 million checks. It's everybody who gets to feed at this trough. And they're going to feed on the back of you and everybody else. And I'm really glad one of the things that Paula had mentioned earlier, one of those earlier comments, was about California. It's exactly right. Fitzgibbons and Inslee and Ferguson and Paul, all these guys want us to be just as incompetent and corrupt as California. And, you know, there was a recent report I remember seeing that Washington State was actually one of the few states. In fact, I think it's the only state that's controlled by Democrats that still has a positive impact on the net GDP of America right now. They're out of the top 10, Washington was the only one in the top 10 that's controlled by Democrats still. Now it's diving down because other states that have more sane policies are catching up and getting ahead of Washington. Now we've had the benefit of having Boeing, despite all the QA problems with plane parts falling out of the sky. Boeing still sells a lot of product and brings in a lot of money. You have Microsoft, you have Amazon, you have Starbucks, you have a massive agriculture sector in our state that brings in just hundreds of millions of dollars. So that makes Washington look very good economically to the rest of the country. And what these policies are continuing to do is to erode and eat away at that growth right now, taking money from you, taking money from your neighbors and your kids, and then diverting it into these other special interests that don't have to make money. They just have to make campaign contributions, and they're good. So anyway, I hope that this worked well playing these clips. Let me know what you think down below. And I'm going to start jumping right back into these questions. And I'm back to Jason here. What is the legality of the protesters setting up camp in college land? Should the police get involved since classes are coming to an end? Okay, so here's the way it works, and I did a video about what my experience was at Columbia when the protesters seized Hamilton Hall. They always do at Columbia, always have since before I was born. Every protest they have that's wants to get antsy or active, they got to seize Hamilton Hall. It's like one of the things they have to do. Now, usually in the past, they didn't use hammers to break the windows out, so that's kind of a new twist to it. And usually they weren't doing it chanting that Israel needs to be free of the Jews, but that's your modern leftist today. Anyway, the question with the legality of them occupying these private spaces on campus, it's very different than just a regular protest, right? Free speech and protesting, I'm all for that. Even crazy nut jobs can get up and say whatever dumb thing they believe. That's okay. That is what protected speech is. Even nasty, ugly speech, that's okay. The problem is, of course, when it becomes violent, when it damages property, or when they're doing things like this where they're occupying this space in the quads. What I don't think people realize, and Columbia is in the middle of Manhattan, right? And I went to school there, and so the issue is those spaces there have kind of limited utility, and you're supposed to sign out for them. You sign up for activities there that you reserve, just so that there's some kind of approach. And a lot of times they're left vacant so that kids can throw frisbees around or sit out in the grass. Obviously, after these guys have been on the lawn as long as they have, they've pretty much wiped out the grass there. But that grass actually gets wiped out periodically anyway, just with the high traffic that they get on it. So the groundskeepers there generally do a pretty good job just trying to maintain it, especially right before graduation, which is coming up. So you got all these parents coming in who have sent their kid to school, and not all of them are the rich trust fund kids like these protesters. Some of them are work-study kids or kids that got scholarships, and it's a big deal for them to graduate. And what these protests are trying to do is destroy graduation, so you don't really have it. And the ceremony and all the stuff that somebody has gone into debt for tremendously probably, or somebody has paid for their college tuition. And so, no, of course they can remove them. They can come in, they can remove them. The question is, though, the police can only do that if the school administration invites them to come in and remove them. And usually there's some kind of negotiation that goes on between the police department, New York City Police Department in this case, and the school administration. Same thing would be like Seattle Police and the University of Washington would do the same thing for tents set up there. It's more troubling for them to take over the buildings because Hamilton Hall is actually where a lot of students, at least it used to be, that's where we would have a lot of our finals. And you have classes there, and you can't go to classes. And obviously, with the threats that were going on, the really weird anti-Jew threats in particular, there's a lot of people who are Jewish in New York City, which it proportionally, there's quite a few of them at Columbia. A lot of my friends there were Jewish. And I just know that when you're basically waving Hamas flags and Hezbollah flags around, and you're chanting the same thing that Hamas chants in Palestine, I don't really think that that's going to become a welcoming environment let's pretend that that's even something that they care about here at the school. And more than that, you're now blocking it off. And so the answer to that is, could they do it? Yeah, the legality is, it's very clear. They've always had the right to control who's on campus. One of the things that it looks like that Columbia has done is they were trying to control access to the gates. There's actually gates on all the campus is entirely fenced, either by buildings, which kind of make up the outside of that campus, or that quad area that you see on the news, or they have gates that they can lock and close. And when they're concerned about safety, a lot of the gates close at night. I lived on a Plimpton, which was a dorm that was off campus, kind of down on 121st Street. So it was a little bit further north, kind of closer to Harlem, on the Amsterdam side of the campus. And so when I'd walk over, if it was in the evening, I had to go to the main gates and go in through there because the other side gates were all closed at night, and that was mostly for crime and safety reasons. So anyway, they can easily bring in the police to remove students. Obviously, they don't want to do that. They'd rather have students not do this in the first place. And you got really squishy lefties that are former activists themselves that are in the administration, so most of them are going to try to bend over backwards to pretend like they're down with the struggle, and they're just as woke as the intersectionality goofballs that are basically arguing about trying to compare where they are in the hierarchy of oppressed peoples out there in the tents. And so it makes the administration particularly weak, just like they were in 1968. And so when that happens, then it turns into this befuddled mess. And the more hands-off the administration is, the worse it tends to get. They really only have the ability to first remove you, have you removed by the police. Secondly, they can expel you, and therefore you can't come back to campus, or they can suspend you so that you can't finish out that semester and come back. Theoretically, they're suspending students. We'll see if they really stick to that. I've heard that threat before when I was at school, and they never really did it that much back then either. This is no surprise right here. Cristiano, I got a question. What's your view over the California raises and minimum wages and the business closures? Will the same happen here? Well, they're going to happen wherever there are large jumps in minimum wage increases, especially when it has no relationship to the value of the work that's done. When I got my first job, my first official job where I was actually paid by the hour, I was making, I want to say $3 and change, working as a dishwasher up at Pleasant Gardens restaurant up on Pack Highway. So I was a dishwasher. It's not the most valuable job out there. I got that as my first job because I was planning to kind of make some money, and that's a good first step. You get in, they get used to your work ethic then, and then you move up to busboy, and then you work there for, I think it was about the same pay, but I could get a little bit of tips at that point in time that the waitresses would share with us. And then eventually, if you stayed there long enough, you'd be able to move up a little bit, but nobody thinks they're in that job because that's their career path for life, and that I should be able to afford a massive $100,000 home on a $3 an hour wage. That's just not realistic. Nobody in those job positions think that, and yet that's kind of this attitude of making this minimum wage so high. So the higher you make that minimum wage, the fewer businesses that are going to operate there. A couple years ago, I was actually talking about trying to do an initiative down in Seattle. And it was such a stupid initiative that I thought I might be able to find enough people there to actually sign on to it. And it was to make the minimum wage in Seattle, instead of $15 an hour, let's make it $150 an hour, right? If a little bit is good, then a lot must be better. And let's just go full hog, skip over all the intermediary steps. Let's go to $150 an hour. Now, what do you think would happen in Seattle? Well, the supporters of minimum wage are going to have to be able to argue with me why that won't work. And I really wanted to do that. And who knows? I may try that as something to do in the future. Alex Brown, you got a question. Did you see WSDOT, Washington, WashDOT, rolling out a program to use costly drones and operators to tackle graffiti on infrastructure? Washington seems to be a leader in costly solutions to trivial issues. I didn't see that program. I'd be fascinated how they think that's going to work. And so it would be funny to see that one. Hopefully somebody, if you can send that to me, I'd really like to see it. Jason, got a question down below. What can be done to clean up public transportation? The gun law you were referencing banned open carry and exempted concealed carry permits. You're right. And Jason, thank you for reminding me on that one. It was an open carry ban, not a concealed carry ban, which at least you can still protect yourself on the place, but it's kind of a mess. It's Sound Transit. I ride transit, and transit rocks. thank you so much. I'm glad you jumped in there to say something different. But you're actually one of the few people I know in the state that's actually said they like it. I used to take buses up to Seattle when I was a teenager, early before I could drive, and it was always even sketchy back then. But now it's just gotten so much worse. Average Geek Joe, good question here. How hard would it be to get an initiative qualified to make the Sound Transit Board directly elected? That's a good question. You'd have to look at the legal structure that exists there. There probably is a path to do that. What I don't think, though, is that because it's multi-jurisdictional, I think I'm right on this, that it's not just King County. So you could do an initiative in King County to do this, but I thought it was multi-jurisdictional, so that may not be enough. I don't know. That requires a little bit of research. I just know when you go from this conversion process, all the counties that Sound Transit touches are home rule charter counties, so most of them should allow an initiative process of some kind. But my guess is these guys are absolutely not going to want you to have a directly elected transit board. So they'll fight you tooth and nail, and I don't know that's how much money, where it goes. Daniel Morrison, where does the money they charge for retail bags go? I'm assuming you mean the amount of money they charge when you go buy something at the store and you have to add that stupid 5-cent or 8-cent extra cost per bag that you get there. Well, the bag tax is something that was actually forced on every retailer or most of the retailers in Washington State because they did it because they want to prevent bags and they want to save pollution in the ocean. That was the argument originally. Of course, it doesn't really end up doing that, but what it does do is it makes, again, cost of living harder for you. And by making the retailer, making it so you pay the retailer for it, it makes it easier for the retailer not to become an opponent of that tax increase. So now the retailer gets to make some profit off of these bags instead of it just being part of a cost of doing business. And so eventually that's how they kind of bribed and bought all the retailers along with this process. Anyway, that's how it works. And so the money just goes into the retailers' pockets, and it doesn't, at least every jurisdiction I've looked at with this, it doesn't go anywhere else. I'm trying to drop down to some questions, guys. I see a lot of comments and no questions. Let's see. Cristiano, I see here, and I don't know. I got another one up here. I'll jump up. How can you go to these meetings and not knock on their head to see if there's something in there? Oh, with government? It's a good question. Listen, a lot of this is just corruption, right? It's not. These are mostly they're at least capable enough to know that if they can, the people who are involved in kind of this the swamp of Olympia, they're making money off the fact that businesses are paying you to come in and convince the legislature to give them cash, kickback schemes, make it harder for their competition, make it easier for them. It's all about the money. If you follow the money, you get most of the answers to most of the questions, and so that doesn't even have to make sense anymore. And I don't know that it ever did, but I still feel like sometimes the corruption that you had 100 years ago was more open and blatant, and now they've just found a way to put lipstick on the pig and make it seem like it's not as bad as it actually is. There was a question here, Cristiano, you had earlier about how about hiring Canadians to get here during snowstorms for cleaning the roads. Apparently only one person in SDOT knows how to do it. Well, one thing to remember about your road cleaning crews is that a lot of them got fired during the COVID lockdown because nothing spreads COVID more than people who are sitting alone in a cab of a truck plowing snow. And because Inslee and the other politicians at the time were using any excuse they could to fire state workers who didn't want to comply with their stupid vax mandate at the time, then they fired a lot of people like that. And so the basic infrastructure breaks down. People who can think for themselves were tended to be a higher percentage of the people that got fired. And so the system really breaks down when you have capable people that you're getting rid of and self-selecting those people out of your workforce. And so the groupthink mentality crew that's left are the people probably least capable of solving practical problems that face you on a daily basis, and that's one of the issues. There's another one, Average Geek Joe. Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. TriMet Max is a disaster down there in Oregon. Super unreliable. It's not fiscally stable, and neither Sound Transit. So it's just the way it goes. Let's see. I'm just getting a lot of comments back and forth here. These aren't questions here, so I'm trying to get up here again to more questions. What if September 11th never happened? Well, great question. You always have these, but these are interesting things to think about, right? One of the things I do think that would have been interesting is that I think that we would have a much smaller government, or at least the bloat of government today wouldn't have occurred at the same accelerated rate as we see it today if September 11th hadn't happened. I think that there was definitely a movement at the time, which I think people are forgetting about a little bit now, just because once September 11th happened, it really changed direction a lot. And it's not just the surveillance state, but it's just the overall bloat of government was a lot smaller at the time. And there was actually a trend to kind of downsize some of the scams that government had been demonstrating that they couldn't do well at the time. There was a strong movement of that in our state and elsewhere. And I think that's one of the bigger changes in 9/11. Now, on top of that, and more dramatically, is that we wouldn't have so many foreign interventions and conflicts around the world. One of the biggest challenges has been this nation state where we're out there basically solving the rest of the world's problems, no matter where they are, no matter how obscure. We can always claim there's some kind of nexus and reason why we need to send an army out and invade that country or rebuild it. If somebody attacks you, fine, destroy them. But then get out of Dodge, right? I don't see any point in staying there trying to fix everything up. And again, you have the Germany, Japan examples that are always used and say, hey, listen, these countries are great countries today, and we stayed there and helped fix them up. And perhaps if you looked at it as a percentage of the GDP and you said, okay, no more than X would ever go into a country, and if they can't get their act together by that time, we'll pull out. We aren't there to solve all their problems. Maybe that would work, but I think that you would see a very different world today without 9/11. But the other question I have is, if it wasn't 9/11, would it have just been something else? That one we'll never be able to answer. Another question from Thunderstriker 303. Another what if? What if there were strict penalties for individuals who failed to secure their firearms, leading to them being used in shootings? Well, right now there are actually pretty strict penalties. I mean, we saw that with the one shooting where the parents are essentially been held liable for what their son did out there. One of the challenges that you have with people who go out and decide to use firearms in particularly like where it's sort of irrational. They're going out to do some horrible crime. They don't care if they survive. Most of the time they don't. They aren't concerned about whatever your penalties or laws are because they're just going to do it anyway. So anyway, that's just, I don't, there's still penalties for it, but I don't know that that's going to change what we see going on right now. Why don't our state's 16 richest billionaires pay the carbon taxes? Well, because they are mostly Democrat donors, and they control the political forces that are here, and they'll always talk and pretend like Nick Hanauer and all these other guys. They'll pretend like they care about taxing the rich, but they really don't. They just want to make sure that you pay for whatever dreams and schemes that they've cooked up, and all for your own good, of course. And so that's why they'll never pay it. And the carbon taxes are a scam anyway. John, did I listen to Jim Walsh on the Undivided podcast? I think he's been on there more than once. I'm not sure about which time you're talking about, but I did not watch him. I don't know if I've seen him recently on that podcast. So I'm assuming you're asking me for a reason, so let me know what that reason is down below if you have it. Let's see. Did you watch the news last month that there's a magnitude 4.8 earthquake hit New Jersey just a few miles away from New York City? And isn't that crazy? I did actually. Now that one I did see, and it's not actually totally unusual. They do have earthquakes back there. They just don't have them to the degree and the significance that we tend to have them on the Pacific Coast. We are much more experienced with earthquakes. My grandfather always told me stories about the 49 earthquake. My parents told me stories about the 64 earthquake, and my mom went to Highline High School and watched the floor crack there and watching the waves. I think she said she was homesick that day and watching the waves out there. One of my grandparents was working down in Seattle, and there was a big tower that apparently fell down in the 1949 earthquake, and he watched there's some cables that hung up thing, and he watched it swinging when he was working, I think, on the ships in downtown Seattle. My other grandfather was a milk truck driver, and where Jones Hill Road comes out down to the Maple Valley highway, Renton Maple Valley Highway. Jones Hill Road was actually a lot lower in that ravine, but the whole hillside sloughed off and covered it. So they essentially just rebuilt the current Jones Hill Road on top of that slide that occurred in 1949 when that earthquake hit. So earthquakes have been around for a long time. The earthquakes in New Jersey are just less common. And I would hate to be back there during an earthquake because their building codes aren't designed to handle earthquakes. At least the way that most modern buildings out here are designed to hold them. I was on top of a high-rise building in downtown Bellevue when I think it was the 2001 earthquake struck. And I remember the whole building just swaying because they're built, to take a certain level of earthquake. It's a pretty scary feeling when you're in the top of a building and it's moving that much. And I remember all of our, all the employees and stuff, we all kind of just huddled up around the elevator, which is the safest part of the building right in the center, until the movement stopped. But it was pretty scary. So I remember that. Let's see. Cristiano, do airline companies avoid fueling their planes here to save some money? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not aware of them modifying exactly how they fuel their planes based on local taxes. They might, but you'd think if they did that they would already be avoiding California like crazy. And I'm not sure that that's something that's actually going on. And there's a little bit of a lag time between the questions that I'm seeing on this screen versus over here. So I'll jump into some of these questions here right now. I know we're getting closer to the end. Let's see. What are the two senators doing well in D.C.? Well, they're collecting paychecks pretty efficiently, and they're kicking money out to their friends. I don't know that there's anything else they're particularly doing well. One thing, and I think this is very hard, and I think this is just what happens with politicians in general. You go back to D.C. and you're in a totally different world now. You campaigned on whatever good cause that you were running on, Democrat or Republican. I'm presuming, and I'll presume that you actually have a reason for what you're doing, and it's not just all vanity or ego or corruption reasons. And so now you go back here, and you're immediately removed from the world in which you lived in, and you're put into this world in which everybody around you is using you as a vehicle to get what they want. Mostly money, power and control, right? But mostly that. And so suddenly, I think it goes to their head very quickly, especially if you're somebody who's not used to that or you've never had that kind of experience before, which I think the majority of people who are new congressmen never really have, not at that level. And now suddenly you're in this bubble where you're completely removed from the realities that most people have to deal with when they live their lives. And I think your disconnect from the reality of home and who elected you is almost immediate and very hard to avoid. And it's been something that you can actually read about even in the early 1800s. Of politicians that would get elected around America and they go back to D.C. and it was something they'd even complain about back then. I can think of a couple of examples of some of these politicians even then talking about how they lose touch with the people who elected them to office. And they're in this little world where you're intense and you're talking about things in a wonkish or disconnected sort of way. And you're horse trading and you're debating on esoteric issues that are peripheral to maybe the core function of why you're there. And you're voting on tons of stuff that you actually know nothing about because there's no way for you to be a subject matter expert on everything. And so you're going to have to be a subject matter expert on this narrow thing over here. And then you're going to outsource and trust that the people maybe in your respective party to the Republicans, that these people are actually going to care about liberty and freedom and your community the same way you do. What I think that does, it sets up a lot of people, especially if they're not aware of what's going on or they're not aware of how intense this world really is. It makes you make dumb votes. You tend to make stupid votes sometimes, accidentally many times, or because there's this massive bill that comes out and there's no way for anybody to possibly have read it in the 12 hours you have before you're going to have to vote on it, and there's 1,500 pages. No one knows what's actually in that bill. You don't. And it's written in confusing language because every lobbyist in the world had some way of kind of modifying it just for themselves. And so this is going on, and you're back in D.C. And so I think that many of these, whether it doesn't matter if it's a state senator or a congressman, going back to D.C. in particular just puts you in a separate world where you're divorced from the reality that you've left. And you go back in there, and I just think most people lose touch with who they really are. And I think that's why you have so many problems with, I totally understand why people want to leave as soon as possible. When I used to go down there and visit D.C. for the limited number of political things I did when I was in college, it made me never want to live there at all. And so I'm always surprised that people really want to go back there. I love Washington State, and Olympia is relatively close to where I live. I feel like I can divorce myself from the drama inside of Olympia for the most part when I need to. But man, we're just stuck in this. You get into that little circle, and all of this corruption around you is going to become a problem. There's no future for liberty and freedom in Washington State unless you have a solution and a plan to downsize the state. And that same thing applies at the federal level. You have to find some way to downsize and shrink the number of people who are profiting from, and entities and groups that are profiting from on the backs of taxpayers. And that means you have to downsize agencies. You have to stop grant grifting operations. Stop giving so much money out and make it impossible to do that. So therefore, you're going to have fewer potential for corruption, fewer opportunities for corruption to occur, and more importantly, you're encouraging then people to be a little bit more freedom and independent oriented around the state. Again, I can't pop this question up here, so I'm not sure why that is. Here's another question. This is from Sin S. What do you think about the reintroduction of grizzlies into the state? I don't like the idea of reintroducing grizzlies into the state. I think it's done purposely to make rural living more difficult and challenging because people who have not lived the nexus between a farm and wilderness, like I have on my back property line, one of the things that you end up doing with livestock, chickens, just your family, is you're constantly managing just a regular influx of predators that are coming in to kill your animals. Lots of them, especially if you have chickens. So it's a good part of just what you're doing. Now, if you're used to this, and you've grown up this way, the way I have, you're fairly, the way you build your pens, the way you manage your animals, you can minimize a lot of the risk, but you're still going to have to deal with predators. And there's nothing more of an apex predator, either pack of wolves or grizzlies, and yet these are the animals that, instead of having, they're just putting these high concentrations of them. If they're so great to have around, they should put them on Orcas Island, and they should put them on Lopez Island and Bainbridge Island and Mercer Island, and then see how well things work out there. I don't think that people would find that they're really easy to live next to. So I think that that's something that, there's just a general misconception about, I think, just wildlife in general, when we're talking about these animals and everything that they can do. So let me see if I can fix this issue here, guys. I'm just making this attempt, and maybe this will help a little bit. Nope, can't seem to get it up. Okay, get that question up there. Let's see. Remember a few weeks ago, this is from Thunderstriker again. Remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the bridge collapsing. And have you also seen the news back in 2007 when the I-35W bridge started to give and collapse, leaving 13 people dead? And I think that's the one was that the one in Minneapolis that you're talking about there? I do remember that. It was, again, a big conversation we had about bridge building. So, okay, there we go. I'm getting my questions back here. So this was... no, I missed that a little bit. This was a grizzly one here, and this was the one I just was talking about. Let's see. You should edit the segments from today's video about the CCA and release them as their own videos. That's a good question. I mean, it's a good thing to do. I think the whole show was actually done pretty well. Brian, thanks for making that comment here. I thought about that, but it's Seattle Public Access TV essentially is where they had the forum, and I only just pulled a couple little clips out to talk about that, but To be fair, I think the whole show needs to be linked down below, which is something I plan to do once I'm done with the live stream tonight. And then that way people can just see the whole thing. And they have a pretty nice rapid pace on that program. And I think the guy that hosts it, I think, does a pretty good job. It's only the second time I've been on the show, but I'm fairly impressed with their professionalism and just kind of hammering, giving everybody a little bit of equal time. They do a pretty good job of doing that. So anyway. Jason, you got a question here on college education moving forward. Will they have to reduce tuition to be more competitive, or will people consider trade schools more? Well, number one, I think the trend is already in place that people are not seeing the equivalent value for public education or just from secondary education, compared to the costs that they're being expected to pay. I know the Biden kickback scheme of paying off the debt for student loans is maybe creating this incentive structure that would encourage these schools to continue to be inefficient and deliver low quality product, and with just the argument that maybe you'll make more money at the end of the day. But I really do think a lot of people are just going to decide that it's not worth going to schools like that, or that you can go to community college and get basically the education you need for a lot less money, a lot less risk, and a lot less drama than going to one of these schools where the kids like to take over the buildings and demand that all the Jews go away. It's weird. It's weird to be even thinking about that at my alma mater. As strange as the leftists were when I was there, as crazy as they were, I am a little surprised, even though there were groups of them who were just as nasty and vicious and hostile to Jews when I was there. The left's just come out and become much more nasty now. And so the other thing, of course, is that if a bunch of colleges start failing, I think on average in a given year you have 3 to 4 colleges that go bankrupt and fold, but they're usually colleges you've never heard of. When some of these bigger schools, I think, start to collapse or fail, or they have to merge because they're failing financially, I think that's when you're going to start to see some of this. Schools will have to wake up and eventually start to provide a quality product without a lot of the waste that goes on in these places. Until then, and trade schools, by the way, also would be a beneficiary, especially for how much money people can actually make in the trades today, and how much need there is for people, for electricians or plumbers or welding or a lot of other really good mechanics, especially the complexity of mechanics now. I think that's going on. TZ Burton. With the upcoming elections, what courses are there to become a poll watcher, and do we even have that anymore? And you absolutely do. No matter what county you're in, all 39 counties in Washington state have the opportunity and encourage people to come and observe the election process at the elections office. Now, remember, we don't have a day. What we have is a week, 2 weeks, weeks of collecting ballots and counting and sorting and organizing. So it's a much bigger commitment than it used to be, when I think you had a lot more people willing to come out on election day and observe. So that's one of the issues. And so I think that there's a number of classes. You want to sign up for that early. I would sign up for it now. Practice on the August election. See if you like it. Love to have more people out there, especially if you're in King County. We need a lot more people there. But also in the bigger counties, Pierce, Snohomish, Whatcom, Clark, and Spokane. There's the more the better, and I think that we need a lot more of them. I don't know how to answer that question. If all plane crashes suddenly cease to occur and never happen again, that's not giving me there's not much to say on that. Let's see. South Carolina State Representative discovered the federal government's giving voter registration forms to non-citizens. What is Washington State doing to ensure non-citizens don't vote? Well, they're not doing anything. The Department of Licensing is giving out, it's registering people to vote right today. With the very minute that I'm talking here, they're registering people in the state who are not U.S. citizens. That doesn't mean they're illegal. Say they could be here on a green card, or they could be legal citizens that are here, but they're not U.S. citizens, and they're registering to vote every single day. They don't do anything to stop that. They don't check it. They don't verify it. They don't care. They'll fire workers who don't register non-citizens. That's been our experience when we've done research into this. It's a big problem. Nobody's checking on it. And it's one of the easy cleanups that could be done in our elections process is just to take people off who are not U.S. citizens. Doesn't mean they're voting. It does mean they're getting registered to vote, and some percentage of them do vote every single cycle. Or the people that are not U.S. citizens, like some Mexican citizens that I've run into who live over in eastern Washington, they'll sell their ballots for about $30 to leftist groups. I'm sure they aren't doing anything wrong with those ballots. Of course not. They can't possibly be doing anything wrong. But that's the going rate. They'll sell them for about $30. And what happens to them after that? Who knows? Because nobody's checking and nobody's really watching that. It's a big issue. It's one that I'd like to focus on. Question here from Matt. Do you think Raul Garcia has a shot of winning versus Cantwell? Well, of course he has a shot. Again, he still has to raise a lot of money. Polling for him has not been great versus Cantwell, so I haven't seen, not that I trust polls always, but they're still related to something, and I haven't seen, where that goes. We'll see. In your opinion, this is a question from Jason, are these degrees colleges offering still worthwhile getting? I know people have spent a lot of money on them, yet they still can't find jobs. I think it does depend on where you go and your flexibility in work after you go out of college. There's plenty of people that go get a fancy degree and then never really utilize it or don't use it effectively in getting a new job. That's true, I think, in a lot of places. If I had leveraged my college degree and stayed in New York City, which is a place that I didn't want to have anything to do with when I was done with college, I could have certainly improved my income situation quite a bit back then. I could have gotten a really nice job out there because a Columbia degree meant something there. You come to Washington State, and nobody knows where Columbia is generally. So, and nowadays they would only know it for all the wrong reasons. So I'm not sure that it represents the same kind of value. I think there's the biggest value you get them going to some of these schools is the networking potential and the people you meet while you're there. And in theory, if you've got a fairly select group of people at a school, your network and your connections are pretty important. And I think that means more to your future job prospects than whatever it says in your diploma. There might be a little bit of an exception to this if you're, like, a little caveat, maybe something I would add to this, that is if you're trying to get a advanced degree in something, nuclear biology, something that requires you to go to a graduate school for hard sciences, then probably your grade and where you went to school is going to matter a little bit more when you're moving up that kind of food chain. But, I've seen people go into shocking levels of debt for exceptionally useless degrees that somebody convinced them, maybe they just convinced themselves were a good idea, and then I don't think that that was worth it. So let's see. That's definitely one of the issues here. Kevin here, non-citizens, boo-hoo, maybe every Native American should get 10 votes. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm a Native American, I guess, so I should get 10 votes. Why not? Let's just turn the entire voting process into a complete circus, and then we'll see where it goes. It doesn't seem like it would go in a good direction. Well, listen, with that, I'm going to close down here. If you are still at the Let's Go Washington event that's not that far away from me, I will try to get there. It'll take me about 10 minutes or so, I think, once I've shut down here. So hopefully I'll see you there. Let me know what you think about me posting those little clips up and trying to respond to them in the live stream while I was talking. Hopefully that was value added to you and you felt like that was useful. I'll do it some more with some other programs. I'm kind of doing that because I want to do a full video on that, and I'll see if I can do that in the future, but I just wanted to get it out there because I did promise you last week I was going to get to that, and I just didn't get around to doing it. So hopefully that provided a little bit of value. Otherwise, next week's filing week, starting Monday, we're going to see who's really out there running for office because they have to start filing the Secretary of State, and that's going to tell us quite a bit. So just remember that thank you so much for watching this live stream. I appreciate your comments. If you have any other comments or questions, feel free to continue to leave them down below. Even if it's past the live stream era, I will try to respond to your questions at that point. But anyway, we'll see how it goes, and we'll see you next week. I'm planning to do this again next Tuesday at 5:30, and I hope it works out well for you. Enjoy the weather if you're out there. I think a lot of the weather is pretty good at this point in time, and just don't forget to share, subscribe, and like this video down below. We'll talk to you then. See you next time.